I feel like someone's following me.
The internet is a medium that constantly presents new methods of storytelling, and makes the artistic landscape a much more immediately experimental place. As a form of self-expression, art in its purest form is meant to display the emotional intent of its creator, and what is produced from that initial intent is not always a masterwork in itself. In ways, sometimes an artist never intends to be deep or meaningful, but instead hopes to make something engaging or slightly interesting, or at the very least fun. What I find amazing about that, though, is that even when the initial intent is not artistic, there are rare moments when the end products unintentionally form a new mass consciousness, one that opens the door for creative expression and, as I've come to realize, takes on the form of one of the biggest experimental art pieces on the internet. The Slender Man isn't an unpopular character in horror web media. An urban legend entity with a very vague and underdeveloped story behind him, the Slender Man would normally be considered by writers and visual artists to be at most an interesting aesthetic concept with at most two consistent themes, the unknown and the uncanny. This is potentially a recipe for some very one-note and uncompelling stories, which do exist online in the form of some web blogs and small amateur homemade YouTube series here and there. But there is something very important to point out about the stories produced under this umbrella, good or bad. These works are the rawest form of creative expression. As web media becomes more and more distilled to specific new corners and forms of sharing content, the way we consume that content becomes relative as well. As many of you might have heard, the medium is the message. Our content consumption parameters have shifted from television to YouTube and Vine and Twitter, where our general understanding of our intake of stories is altered. This is furthered when these platforms are used exclusively to tell stories that are more than just visual, but interactive. Alternate reality games were a huge first step in discovering new methods of media sharing and artistic expression. By making the audience a part of a character's situation or message, we as an audience gain a new perspective on a story that grounds its characters and asks us to interpret their meaning from within its space. The Slenderverse, I think, is a wonderful splintering byproduct of this new medium. It's messy, it's at times confusing and disjointed, it's vulgar, and it's meaningless. But it's also emotional, meaningful. It's narratively pushing the boundaries it's set, and it's expressing the smallest and most nuanced ideas in an artist's mind through the same core concept, seen through the lens of dozens, hundreds of different people with different perspectives, monetary capabilities, limitations, and intentions. Through the Slenderverse, we're able to see, in what I believe is the most raw distillation, what an artist is capable of, despite almost always having nothing. Web video has made it increasingly easier to make potentially great stories with very little resources, and even when what's produced isn't very artistic or meaningful, it's constantly adding a technical perspective to an artistic climate that demands expression. We can learn a lot about an artist based on their age, their priorities in storytelling, and their understanding and use of this template they've been presented with. The Slenderverse is, to me, a storytelling sandbox not unlike the kind in video games or other interactive media. It presents a template and a small list of unspoken rules or guidelines, tropes like distortion, sickness, children, proxy characters, proxy devices, and that one rule where you really should try to avoid using the operator symbol because Marble Hornets is kinda not Slenderverse. I mean, it's used anyway, you know. I've even used it. And it gives newcomers to film and visual storytelling a sort of beginner's guide. Stories don't always come naturally to people interested in making movies, and while that's a core facet of film, the very least the Slenderverse offers is a place for these novices to start. We love looking at the standout artistic titans of the Slenderverse, and for good reasons. Some series truly flourish artistically under this template, from intricate world building and interactivity, to advanced skill and spectacle, to visual and metaphorical nuance, to character depth, to intensive and precise plotting, to skilled lead performances, and so on. These series creators are fluent in the language of film in more than one way, and those ways are definitely critically comfortable and easy to read or unpack, but they're not emblematic of the whole of the Slenderverse. They are in fact a niche portion of it. Most of the Slenderverse is open and unbashful experimentation apart from the language of film, raw ideas before fleshed out stories, mistakes, blatant ripoffs, and explicit disregards for cinema as a means to be economical. And yet, there's something to extract from this, that their ideas, while far from original in most cases, are exposing us to more and more of a single interpretive entity and hundreds of interpretive perspectives. Originality is essential in advancing artistic ideas, this I agree with. But it's also truly special to see everyday people find something new and something old and, more often than not, oversaturated. There is an endless landscape of untapped story potential in the same formulas, and some recent films have definitely helped legitimize that idea. Originality is not abandoning what's come before, it's building on it. And, to be more frank,
original does not mean good. Anyone can do anything.
As artists, the goal we should have is to challenge one another with new perspectives. Art is, after all, first and foremost about self-expression, how we see the world, displayed in our writing, our performances, and our understanding of other art. Or our lack of any of that. As a sandbox of creativity, the Slenderverse has given creators a platform to work with one another, or at the very least to share the smallest of ideas. It's also inspired new and original projects that are both artistically sound and potentially fresh, and yet the Slenderverse still gives its newcomers a familiar place to flex their growing ideas. Give some of the smaller and lesser known Slenderman series a shot. Some might be tiresome or even unwatchable. Some might resonate with you more than you had anticipated. Some might annoy you and drive you to renounce the Slenderverse as another tired attempt at obsessive fandom production. And some might make you say, shit, that was a pretty good encounter. Or a pretty shitty encounter. Thanks for watching.